Welcome to the latest episode of the IOTA Cybersecurity Panel. I'm Brian Sherman, host and moderator of today's discussion on adapting cybersecurity to a work-from-home hybrid ecosystem. The great news is I'll be joined by an all-star cast of industry experts who can wax eloquently about the threats and issues created by the business response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's cybersecurity panelists include Billy Austin, president and co-founder at Rocketcyber, Kyle Hanslovan, co-founder and CEO of Huntress, and Gill Langston, head security nerd at Solarwinds MSP. Good day, gentlemen.
Good day.
Huge thanks.
Good. Let's start off with a quick check-in. We won't get too serious right off the bat, but how are each of you faring during the pandemic? Why don't I start with you, Kyle? How's everything going on your end?
So family's doing good. I happened to move just in the nick of time there, where our new house has access to a pool. So I'm totally taking advantage of that. Family's doing pretty well and pretty healthy, and employees, are doing the best they can with it. At the end of the day, right? Everybody's kind of, the uncertainty is got everybody on their toes. But I think with this being the new norm, it's as good as it could be.
Awesome. How about you, Billy?
Yeah, lockdown way down here in the South. I've got kids in Colombia, I've got kids in Spain and in the US, and I've got one here in Mexico. And so just lockdown, I don't really think it matters where you are. We're all in the same situation. And I definitely had to install Zoom for the first time to start communicating with the family.
It's a great tool to have, the conference lines. And Gil, how's everything in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I'd say the same. We're doing well. Family here, we're kind of homebodies anyway. We like being at home, so there's that. We're working from home and kind of making connections with the teams at work. I think we've done really well at doing that. I would say there is a little bit of, after a few months of kind of cabin fever or stir craziness going on. So making sure that we do things to get out on the weekend where we're not contacting a lot of people, like drive to the mountains and enjoy the view. We've been doing some of that to kind of retain some sanity.
Yeah, I hear that. My wife has me doing all of the landscaping, so I can feel it in my back right about now. But we're very lucky on our end. I mean, the biggest thing I have to complain about is I can't get a haircut. So if that's my biggest problem, it's a good thing. But now, one thing I wanted to check in with, because I'm starting to see people, getting out a little more. Do any of you have vacation plans this summer? What does vacation look like in a COVID-19 situation? Anyone?
So we don't have anything formal here at the family, but we have been taking advantage of, like, some of the hours that the beaches are open are very limited for people. And so we went out the other day and literally couldn't see somebody as far as, we could see. So that was nice to be able to enjoy kind of like your own private beach type feel. So that was our mini vacation.
Very good. Anybody else?
So go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, I was just going to say they've got the highways locked down here, so you can't even attempt to see the beach. So supposedly that's going to open up on the 16th or maybe the 21st of June. And so not really formal vacation, but just getting out past Walmart would be nice.
On my side, we had actually had to cancel a trip that we had in the spring and rescheduled that to October down in Dominican Republic, and hoping that things are in a better place so that we can actually take that trip then.
Yeah, very good. I know. I wish I was in the Outer Banks right now, but I don't think anybody wants us traveling there from.
I don't think they would enjoy it. They would appreciate seeing an outsider right now. It makes them all nervous, right?
Yeah, we have a couple places around us that draw a lot of international people too, and yeah, the locals are like, yeah, you can stay home this year. Say that until it hits their pocketbook, but
right.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting year. But I'm glad everybody's safe and enjoying whatever time they have free. It may not be a vacation, but yeah, you need to get some time away from the office for sure. So let's get down to the business of cybersecurity, which is why we're here today. So one of the things I wanted to start off with is one of the recent Gartner surveys showed that 74% of businesses intend to permanently shift some of their staff to a work from home environment. And Global Workplace Analytics suggests that more than half, in their case, 56% of the US workforce holds jobs that are at least somewhat compatible with remote work. So the situation is there. Those numbers seem to align with what I'm hearing from our IOTS advisory board members and some of the other MSPs that I talk with regularly. Do you think companies will actually follow through and reduce their physical footprint in the next couple of years, or will they adopt more of a hybrid model where employees can split time, home, office, throw in obviously travel when we get back to that type of situation? Why don't we start with you, Gill? What are your thoughts on that?
You blew his mind there, Brian. You blew his mind.
I definitely think, we got lost there for a second. I think I'm back.
Yeah, technical difficulties.
Okay.
Yeah, you're up.
Cool. So a lot of organizations in the news have been saying, larger ones, that they are definitely going to be supporting work from home and are actually kind of planning long-term plans. I've talked to some of our MSPs and they've had conversations. It kind of depends on the vertical, the size of the organization. Some of the smaller organizations, let's face it, some business owners like being able to swivel their seat and talk to somebody, and I'm not sure that this is going to change their mind. You have some medium-sized organizations who are looking at that flexibility, and as you get larger, there's an eye on rent and costs associated that they might be able to save. So I do definitely see some organizations moving to that, but at the same time, I think on the smaller side, especially depending on whether you're customer facing and where you have to be, obviously. I don't know we'll see as much on the small side, but I think in the medium and the larger businesses, we'll certainly see a big move to that.
Because we've seen the Facebooks, and there's several large companies that said that they're going to significantly downsize their commercial real estate that they have. Obviously, there's benefits to that, but I think that maybe they've developed some trust was always a question, is can we trust our employees to work from home? And I think this is proven in most cases they can, although you can also weed out those that you can't. What do you think, Billy? What are you seeing, and what are your partners sharing on that front?
Yeah, it's very intriguing, the question, and I kind of like what Gill said. It depends on the industry and the vertical. It also depends on the size of the company, and when you look at these companies that are kind of between 5 and 10 employees, and there's lots and lots of those throughout North America, they may be averaging anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 in monthly rent. And they're obviously, everybody's looking to reduce costs where you can. And when you back up for a minute, you look at who's actually the landlord, or you look at the companies providing that leasing service like Regus, Next offices, and you look at their specials coming out, they're literally reducing their cost 50, 60%, if you sign a 18 to 36 month contract. So they're definitely feeling the pain as well. And my perspective is, I think a good portion of the 31 million North American small business are going to implement a partial work from home policy. There's some businesses like chiropractors, dentist offices, obviously, those are kind of in its own ball field. But for other classifications of business, definitely see a mix across the board, if you will.
Yeah, we've even seen some hospitals that have like their billing and other departments, and said, we really don't need those to be in-house, whether they even outsource it completely, but they're putting employees out and planning to permanently keep them out. But Kyle, how about your thoughts on that trend?
So Huntress is already a bit of an oddball. We have started from day one being a fully remote team, not even a hybrid approach. So that was, I think that's a little bit forward leaning, but that's the type of thing you can do in our type of industry. I also think about all those businesses that Billy highlighted, that like the chiropractor business, or, the age old adage about real estate, which is location, location, location. If that is dependent, virtual is not the location that people are demanding. So I think there will be some that hold on. But the most important part of it, I think, is this clearly showed this is feasible. And I think trust is the overall. With that said, if you take a look at all three, whether it's Solarwinds, Rocketcyber, Huntress, our products work regardless of where you're at. If you were shipping an old school appliance that had to go with you somewhere, that doesn't work so well when everybody moves to disparate locations. But I think the SMB was already mobile, whether it was cyber cafes, traveling on vacation. We've already been going down this route. So I think hybrid is where we're gonna move to for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the hottest topics I've seen in the MSP forums has more to do with productivity tools and, the screen connects and other things to be able to check on productivity. I realize that there are some things that it's not perfect, but at least they've got some options to look at to show that we are watching and we want to make sure that everybody's doing what it takes. But what about on the cybersecurity side? So if you've got companies that are maybe, especially in the high rent districts, I mean, I think of like California and New York City, where scaling down obviously would save a tremendous amount of cash for a business, mid-sized business, large business, even small business. What are the cybersecurity implications of having to manage, whether it's a hybrid or just the remote workforce? Why don't I start with you, Billy?
Yeah, I think, that's a loaded question because we could literally have a conference just on this topic. But,
sure.
One thing that I see is a lot of remote workforce. They didn't have corporate laptops, so they're now being asked to connect to corporate resources from their kids' Windows 7 box, which is typically, something that's used for Half-Life or, whatever the Doom or online gaming hot application happens to be. And anytime you have shared computing resources connecting to the corporate environment, that's going to present, a significant opportunity for, the land of hackers, if you will. And understand it's all about time to get employees productive and get them active and connected to their CRMs and accounting systems, so on and so forth. I would say phase one that I probably saw was a mad rush for, VPN clients. So VPN vendors probably benefited significantly. Secondly is, when you look at, just the multitude of the entire family logging onto that same PC, which we see on a daily basis, the risks are just enormous because now you're trying to tie the risk back to the actual employer, or is it tied to your kid or to your mother? So nevertheless, lots of new risk being open. They're actually old risk, but they're being presented in a new manner.
That's a good point. What about, I guess I should say, so you've got a lot of exposed vulnerabilities, issues out there. What are some of the answers that MSPs should be looking at when it comes to solving those cybersecurity ecosystem issues?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a quick blurb. I mean, pretty much all of us on this phone call provide some type of continuous monitoring, which when you look at the governing body, people like NIST and CIS and all these government organizations, that's one of the biggest things they're recommending right now is how they're very adamant of stressing the importance of continuous monitoring, being able to provide coverage on the attack vectors, which are basically entry vehicles inside, to the corporate resource, if you will. And Kyle kind of touched on it. It's, historically we had these big honking boxes that we threw on at the subnet that collected data and, did something with that data, provided real-time monitoring of network traffic, endpoint traffic, whatever it happened. And, now it's, we've got to migrate with how people are going to interoperate and do business. So there are answers, and as the guys mentioned, it's all of our technologies work regardless whether you're on the network or whether you're off the network.
That makes perfect sense. Now, Gill, with all the uncertainty, obviously, to this too, is how can you address, looking at new projects, policies, procedures. Billy mentioned monitoring. What do you think is the special sauce for an MSP is going into to maybe businesses that aren't familiar working remote and they're planning to work remote or develop this type of hybrid system?
Well, and we all touched on this a little bit. The beauty of this is managed service providers, by definition, have always worked remote, right? I mean, they're supporting all of these remote people. They understand the challenges and concerns. So it wasn't really, that much of a change for them. I mean, it was a chance now to educate their customers on these types of risks and concerns to kind of pull them into the fold. But back to what Billy said about the using the Windows 7 laptop that's got Minecraft or Doom or whatever on it, and all of these things. Early on, that's what you had to do, getting people connected. But now, as you move into this next phase of, well, this may go on for quite some time or permanently, it really is time to operationalize some of those things that you do for the corporate environment, the four walls, and extend those. But also consider, let's say that you were like, we've got to get two-factor implemented, and this was the impetus. Well, you've got to then formalize that across all of your customers, make sure that they understand those risks, those concerns. But then also look into your point about some new technologies. I love what you said about this. This is kind of the risks were always there. But now people are like, well, what if somebody downloads critical documents to that Windows 7 machine and they can be stolen? Well, I got news for you. That's been a problem for years. Yeah. Someone could easily just take a document and upload it to Google Drive and to their own personal box or whatever. That's always been there. But now people are kind of waking up to that. So even looking into new technologies, like maybe even user entity behavior analytics and things that can show you those and rise those types of issues up to the top, let you know that a machine might have been compromised or someone's attempting to compromise it from that hostile environment of the customer network, are things that I think MSP should be looking into as well. You're muted, I believe, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Thoughts on that, Kyle?
I think maturation, right? Maturing this process is well into where we're at. It's crystal clear we're not going back to the norm. I know everybody abuses the new norm word, but that's where we're at. And with that said, how should MSPs address their client cybersecurity ecosystem? I think this is super simple, and a lot of it starts with confidence and building on what Gill already said. And MSPs have already been remote always. This is their time to shine, to say, look, you're just getting used to having the idea of remote work environment. We were rolling trucks, for the past 20 years. We've been doing this type of thing. So that's nice. But I think sometimes you got to be able to convey it a little bit more simple. So giving those, for instance, the data being moved to the cloud, that was always a risk. But also when you have something physical, right, when seeing is believing, it's really easy to understand that, data is now on that computer that's in somebody else's house. The cloud is just this weird, it goes somewhere, right? There's not a physical, you don't hold the cloud, right? You don't think of the server that's somewhere else. So I think obviously there's monitoring, there's policies. For me, the biggest one is about using what you already have. There's a lot of things that we don't even use, like the group policies, things to harden our networks, the RMMs that are historically underused and misunderstood, not properly invested in within many MSPs to be able to how to harden their clients' networks is just a ripe opportunity. And we've got Solarwinds on this call, so I think it's the ideal time to bring some of that stuff up.
Well, to your point, Kyle, we brought in we have an automation nerd, and that is his biggest thing is we have, a ton of ways for you to automate security policies on any system as long as you have an agent on there. And so we really, during this whole thing, we've been pushing that and making sure that even if it's a system you don't own, you should still be hardening it. You should have that discussion with the business owner. Should we give them a laptop that is corporate owned, or should we continue to support that home machine? But either way, we've got to harden the system and make sure that we're extending those protections out to these hostile environment networks, right?
Now, Gil, when you mention automation too, it also makes me think of integrations. Is when you have such a trend towards distributed workforces, the MSP's workload could technically get larger. How important are the integrations that they're doing right now? Are you seeing a lot of push for MSPs to get all these tools linked into their PSAs and their RMMs and others?
Well, there's always been that push, right? I mean, and it was for an efficiency standpoint. Now that's amplified, right? Because you are getting more of a workload. I think it's interesting to me. So many MSPs had always talked about how they didn't want to support what they called consumer or customer networks. And now guess what? You're doing it, right? You have to. So their workload has gone up. Integrations are very important. Being able to, have at least one place where you're doing your billing and ticket management, everything's feeding into that. And then everything else becomes your ancillary, tools that you log into less frequently is super important. I mean, I think that's the way they're going to be able to tackle this additional workload.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Bill, you had mentioned NIST, because we bring up NIST a lot, obviously. CompTIA also has kind of a similar take from that, which is the security, their security standards, their channel security standards, which are kind of built on top of that and are more specific to an MSP. What other, I guess I should say, as we're trending to move towards this remote workforce, I won't say it's invalidating some of those things, but it's causing them to shift, is how do I harden somebody working, to your point, from a gaming system at home? How do I get them shifted over towards this? Now, as we come out of the pandemic, more businesses will be free to, start adding equipment and bringing people in and getting them set up. Do you see a trend of everybody kind of rehardening what they're sending people home with now?
Yeah, once again, that is another loaded question. I've got a lot of experience with the whole, COBITs, CISs, NIST, all that good stuff. And so to answer your question is, regardless, when you step back for a second and look at these SMBs, most of them have to adhere to some type of mandatory regulation. So as it relates to things like PCI, HIPAA, sometimes they fall into multiple. When you look at the underlying pinnings of those requirements, most of them will reference that, you need to meet at least XYZ requirements from NIST and or CIS, which are typically two of the most, kind of the top bodies that I would probably recommend for the MSP market. I think things like COBIT and a few other controls are probably a little bit too cumbersome. In fact, when you just step back and you look at NIST, and we speak to MSPs about NIST, and they don't know where to start. They understand they need to, to harden their systems, but when you have one governing body that's reputable and they say, hey, your password should be, 8 characters, and then the other one says it needs to be 12. And then the other one says, by the way, that policy needs to enforce password changes every 52 days, and the other one says 90. So you have conflict, and then you have to be able to standardize on a governing body, which probably more often than not, I'm probably hearing NIST being more adopted. But to be honest, I know some very well security talented MSPs, and even they admit we don't know where to start. We don't have the tools, the technology, and also the people to help put this in place. And I can't recall if it was Gill or Kyle mentioned it, but RMMs have a lot of functionality that's built in that can be able to implement a lot of the hardening baselines as it relates to the endpoint. But something that's also commonly overlooked is what we already have that's free, well, kind of free, and we'll call that GPO. I mean, look at all the things you can do in GPO. As far as, let's say today we all decide to take off an hour and say, let's go create a spreadsheet of the top 50 controls that we can all probably come to an agreement on. And we'll just call it the IoT SSA hardening guide. How are we going to implement that? We could literally create policies in GPO and roll that out to all the end users. But you got to have the people. You got to have the people that's going to implement, monitor, what happens if somebody goes outside of compliance. And I'm kind of rambling on, but I'll just stop right there.
No, oh, go ahead, Gil.
I was going to say it's a really good point, but it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the Windows 7 box, right? It's likely not domain joined, they're VPN'd in, and those are really concerning to me. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, as security professionals, you just imagine the situations that a lot of these people are sitting in. And that should scare the service providers, because honestly, where does the risk really lie? I mean, at the end of the day, back to the managed service provider, making sure they're keeping things secure. So yeah, focusing on GPOs, on automation, this is just, it's something that's going to have to be a main focus. And I agree, Billy, about NIST. I mean, you opened up NIST 853 and you start looking at it and you're like, oh my, where do I start with this? It's like you have to bring these things, collapse them into smaller chunks and areas and start there and then grow and then grow. I mean, that's a process that would take a long time.
Yeah, no, we could literally start up a company of selling barf bags every time somebody looked at the NIST benchmarks, right?
Yep.
It's, you know, it makes even the guys that have experience in it. So I kind of feel that the sadness or the feelings that an MSP, it can be a very daunting experience when somebody first, you know, lies and they're going to say, you know what, yes, I agree with this. I agree with this. Maybe I don't, so I'm going to modify this. But then it's like, how do you implement it? How do you monitor it? And how do you account for the changes? And, you know,
how do you monetize it? Right.
Right.
Let alone anything else. Right. Oh gosh.
Yeah, as an MSP, to your point, you have to be able to then put on, you know, I always say, make sure security is on the front page. And if you say we focus on NIST standards and somebody says, great, let me see your spreadsheet, let me see your list, what do you do? How do you make that part of your packaging, your bundling, and make it valuable to where a small to medium business sees the value instead of just saying, well, don't I have antivirus? I mean, I'm fine, right? And that is the education gap that I've been working with a lot of partners on at Solarwinds MSP since I joined is, you know, how do you communicate this stuff to these business owners so they understand the value and are willing to pay you for it? It's a hill to climb.
And I think when you're looking at the channel too, you've got MSPs and they get it. They're fantastic at the technology. I'll probably roll this out to their team members, which is a perfect test bed, is I've got all of my people remote. We're utilizing this, but how to communicate that, to your point, to that last mile, to the end user who's sitting out there in Timbuktu on his own outside of his company and really doesn't have much direction other than he was told, go home and work from home. It gets complicated. Kyle, do you have, what are your thoughts on what we were talking about as far as the standards?
Pick one and move forward. You could, you know, you could argue this till you're blue in the face. You know, even pick one and kind of move forward. You know, any of that. I see analysis paralysis, or the fear of I have to get it perfectly right, and you're not going to get it perfectly right. I get the benefit of working with our MSP partners and some of, you know, the channel partners that we're talking significant. We take a look at some of the highest level breaches of MSPs with 1,000-person companies. They have the same issues of picking forward and moving forward. You know, the Cognizant breach that became more popular here in the last couple of weeks, where the ransomware hackers were, you know, not only took their data, but, you know, dumped it on the dark web or threatened to dump on the dark web. And if you can't do it at that level, even at a smaller level, like you don't just move forward with something. And my argument would be, you know, if you have to move forward with something, you know, probably start with what you already have. You know, there's probably more than enough rather than, you know, I think we used a word earlier of we were reducing physical footprint. But ironically, the opposite end of that is we're like expanding our attack surface.
Yes.
So, you know, if you don't just do something, you know, I think you're going to get left behind. The opposite side of it too, for me as an entrepreneur, that I enjoy the most is it's not just do something on the technology either. You're going to have to figure out how to monetize this, market this, sell this at the end of the day. Everybody has to pull their weight at an MSP nowadays to be able to adjust with this post-COVID-19, post-economic recession world, because it's not just the technology. There's a lot that goes into it that once you get the tech piece figured out, then you could, you know, wrap the business model around it as well.
What are your thoughts on, now I know you brought up the monetizing it part is obviously crucial. You've got a lot of businesses that are struggling, and if they're not struggling now, they may struggle with cash flow eventually. We're working in a B2B community. This may last months to years before we see this going on. So cost sensitivity is going to be an issue. But many MSPs have taken on extra costs right now because they're supporting remote workforces, while they may have clients only paying for, like, you know, in-office seats in one location. They're supporting 2 locations in many cases. Do you see that the pricing discussion is going to have to come up as we come out of this? What are your thoughts on that approach for MSPs? Anyone want to jump in?
I don't mind kicking it off. I think when please. I said earlier that you have to reimagine, it wasn't just the tech. It's, and for instance, the gold standard for all you can eat has been bill by the user, regardless of how many endpoints they support.
Right.
How well is that working for your cost of goods sold now that you've doubled the amount of endpoints now that everybody went home? You know, that's the raw side of it. And unfortunately, like, you have to have finance chops to be able to survive this and say, ooh, you know, we absorbed this new cost, and it's putting some of the industry's best leaders. Like, if you look at the Paul Dipples, the Gary Pikas, some of the people that have raw data on this that are actually giving financial advice, they're going back and reassessing and saying, ooh, you know, there's ways that we're going to have to adjust. And we said before, you weren't charging enough. You know, I meet the $75 per user MSP that could never believe they could charge $150 per user. And now it's really obvious when you've doubled the number of endpoints you support and maybe multiplied your remote workstations by, 2 or 3-fold, you know, you're going to have to figure that out. So I'll open the door saying, yes, the financial model is going to have to change.
Any other thoughts on that?
I just like to say we had some conversations. We did a series of webcasts, myself and the other nerds at SolarWinds, when this all started, talking about, what is this going to look like? And one of the things we talked about was, hey, we understand that the SMBs you're supporting are probably struggling, very price sensitive right now and concerned. Maybe you should be offering to assist them with this move and kind of leaving things status quo. But one of the things we recommended is maybe you should put that on their monthly invoice as a $0 item, so that you're assisting them. That's going to allow you to go back now and say, okay, things have kind of calmed down. You even see the jobs reports have started to turn around a little bit, which is good news. So what that means is things are going to continue to grow. And now it's time to have that conversation again with the business. Well, new normal, unfortunately, to coin a term Kyle kind of said we've been overusing, is this is the way things are going to be. It's time for us to revisit, not only our security posture and all of those things, but our support model, what we're doing, which means you do have to be very organized and have your checklist and all your items together. And here's what we've been doing for you. Here's what we need to do moving forward. Are there things we can strike from this and replace? But you're right. If you're an all-in model, Kyle, you're kind of in a situation now where it's like, well, okay, now I have to manage the costs and the back end as the service provider. So, there's no right answer. And I think you said it earlier, is that we have a lot of different service providers doing a lot of different business models. But, the one thing I would say is that you're providing a service, and that service does cost money, and you need to make sure that you're being paid for that service. So however you work that out, it's absolutely important that you have the conversation. Just as a side note, I do a monthly webcast with our MSPs where we let them ask questions, we have discussions, and I ask them questions. And one of the things that I saw in one of the surveys is only about, 15% had a plan in place already for return to work. 31.5% have started the conversation but have no plans completed. And 26% said that they need to start. Another 26% said, we're going to be in wait and see mode. Yeah, I know the numbers don't match because I did allow it to be multiple, because some of them are in, think about it. You have 50 customers, right? They're not all in the same state.
I'm about to call you out.
Yeah, I know, right? But at the end of it, 15, 31, 26, 26. Actually, that's about right.
That's
think about it. Yeah. So, but either way, not all of them even had the conversation. A lot of them are still in wait and see mode, which means they're probably have not figured this out yet. So it's time to start doing that for sure.
What's funny is that kind of reminds me of the hype cycle, right? You've got your, early movers, you've got the trough of delusion, right? And then you have some of the laggards in the farther to the right. It's funny how statistics, right, uncover some of this, like, I'm going to wait and see. Technically, you might be a laggard. You also might be the smart laggard. So
right, that there is some, sometimes waiting and seeing is the right thing to do, and you don't know that until it's all over and done with. I don't think, you see in some locations the infections are going back up with COVID. So who knows what the next decision is? Who knows what the next stage is? I don't think we do. Globally, locally, there may be more of a understanding of where we're going, but you never know what happens next. So maybe the wait and sees are in the right place. I don't know.
Well, the title of our discussion was actually Times of Uncertainty. So, you can throw a lot of things to the wind when you say we're uncertain about what's going to happen. But the unfortunate part is after 3+ months is, people have to get down to business now and figure out how to get their model assessed and make sure that they're going to be healthy for the long term, because they have employees to think about themselves from an MSP perspective, suppliers. It's a complicated business, but end of the day is, security, need to make sure their clients are secure. One thing I wanted to touch on too is, now, what are you seeing with even if a company goes from, or an MSP has like 10% remote workforce that they're managing, if they go to 20 or 30, you've got a lot of different endpoints in different locations. How do they test? What are you seeing as far as testing going on right now? Because I've heard a hodgepodge coming back from the MSPs I've talked to about that. Kyle, you look like you're aggressively ready to address this.
I think Gill and I are both smiling because the reality is, testing itself is tends to be sometimes more of an art than a science, even though the word test should probably be aligned with a hypothesis and measured. But there's a reason that in 2020, we still have people trying to perfect asset discovery of what do they even have in a network, let alone how do I test its efficacy of how well it's working. So I'm going to steal from Billy and say, once again, Brian, loaded question, but I'm going to embrace it, right? I think the idea behind it is best effort, iterate, improve, just move on, fail fast, fail often. All these cliche mantras, I think, apply here. And I think that's where I'll also leave it, right? I think there's only so much testing to the point that you just got to move.
Gotcha. Implement it, follow through, and do the best you can. So one other point, several of the security experts I've talked to have alluded to the fact that they've seen less than expected number of attacks during the COVID-19 pandemic. Gill, you may be one of them that I'm referring to here. Does that align with your experience? Billy, why don't I start with you? Are you seeing that from your partners? And should we expect what's that?
Did you say Billy or Gill?
Billy. Yeah, do you, is that aligning with what you're hearing? And do you expect those threats to rise as businesses reopen or return to some level of normal activity?
Well, I'm not sure where that intel is coming from, but I can tell you that, probably, I have to go back and look at the date. We've been running all kinds of analysis, but we've seen a significant uptick in attacks. Historically, where we've had, given all of this threat stuff from the home, we have seen quite a few attacks originate from the home, but we're also seeing it, a new round of attacks actually significantly. I would probably say there's probably 3 compromises a day that we're uncovering just related to Office 365 compromises. And, when you look at what is the root cause of how this breach occurred, somebody always opens up an email, they click on something bad, plug in a USB, however it originates. But at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff actually happens via email. And, if you can catch them at the email compromise level, hopefully you can deter their activity before things, progress, into something worse. But at the end of the day, I would say our attacks, so when we're identifying events, we move it to an incident stage, and they've probably grown at least 10x over the last 6 weeks. So I'd say the opposite. It's actually spiked tremendously.
Do you think that, did that change during the period, or did I just get bad intel? Because, sometimes.
Well, so, our business has been growing, but not at the rate of 10x over the past 6 weeks in terms of to validate the significant volume or uptick in attacks. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the total opposite. We're seeing things that we've never seen before. And I also think, when I look at the factual evidence or some of the investigation reports that are provided, a lot of it's due to those home PCs. It's due to compromised machines. And there's something I want to throw out. It's not just that Windows 7 box that you're sharing with dirty little Johnny playing games. Remember, that little dirty little machine's also sitting on a subnet.
Yep.
With all these other machines with no AV, no other protection, and we haven't even talked about that. So that means your cousins, your sisters, and your brothers are now all sharing your dirty, all that dirty good stuff with you that's going to help share it with all your corporate partners. And that right there is just, it's a huge concern. And I think
Billy, I think just yesterday we saw that report that, IoT devices are being more and more leveraged for network recon and scanning the subnet, and he's loaded with them, right? I mean, it's not just the systems, it's IoT devices, all this internet facing stuff.
Yeah.
That's why I call it a hostile environment. It really is, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, just the the brute force monitoring attempts of trying to get into web applications has caused us to hire additional security analysts. I mean, the volume of data has just increased tenfold in terms of suspicious malicious activity. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, it doesn't take long for cyber criminals to figure out where the vulnerabilities are, does it?
So Brian, I just had to report this data to my board, ironically, on Friday. And so I went back and looked at the data. So for us, we hit our highest spike ever of Huntress history. And this is, normalized considering like growth and things in March. So there was definitely a significant number of COVID-19. We had a little bit less in April, and May has been slightly less than March as well. But we're still elevated as well in those months compared to pre-March dates. That doesn't mean it's necessarily COVID-19 related, but for us, our big elevation was significant in March. So I would say, I don't think ours is anywhere close to as high as 10x, but it's definitely significant on that side.
Well, do you think that's from the cyber criminals taking advantage of the fact that everybody's working in different environments, using different machines, don't have the proper protections in place, to Billy's point earlier too? And there's a lot of different factors. It would make sense. That's why I was a little skeptical when I'd heard that originally too, because it's like, are they just taking a pause?
It's also different data sets, depending on what you're looking at. So I don't think any of them are right or wrong. It's just interesting to see your different cohorts of how you might look at that data.
Yeah.
Brian, I can tell you that, our email security team saw a doubling essentially of attempts. Now, to your point, and Billy, how you talked about moving something to an incident versus, a block like this. We blocked, double the amount during this time with our email security solution. Now, we didn't hear about a lot of breaches, which is a good thing, but definitely there was an increase in attempts. Like you said, the cybercrime is opportunism, right? You go where the money is. And if you think there's more money in people at home doing human things instead of good little worker things in the office, you're going to start targeting email because they're at home clicking on it. We did ask our MSPs in another survey in one of my office hours, have you seen an uptick in incidents, right? Where a call comes in, you have to respond, not just a block in your antivirus report. But 66% said they stayed the same. They're about the same, at least at the endpoints that they were protecting. But what's interesting is almost 10% said, I don't know, which is very telling in this situation. They don't know. They still don't know. They're not confident in the new situation, if they are in fact protecting these guys and the systems aren't compromised. And that's pretty concerning.
Yeah. So also wonder how many were the cybercrime. I'm seeing a lot of the phishing schemes coming in with PPP as a tagline, and especially for businesses. I mean, what a perfect way to try to tag them with, hey, there's additional money available.
Or infected person in your area. Who's not going to click on that, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'll just throw out something else that we've seen an uptick in is, we saw a significant decline in what we call cryptojacking, bit mining activity. But I would also say during this COVID, it's actually picked back up, which is the first increase in mining activity that we've seen probably over the past 8 months. And that was as of April. And I think that's probably due to two things, or at least my personal assumption. One is you have people looking to make some side money, so they're looking to download some mining clients just to generate some side cash. That could be one potential. Two is they have more time to play online gaming, which in many cases, or at least some evidence that we've seen, incorporate some type of mining activity inside those games that they don't know about. And then third is when you look at the Bitcoin value, it looks like it's making a big turn. So therefore you take those three things alone, that could probably be one of the instigators that's causing a rebound on the crypto mining, crypto jacking activity. So it's something that doesn't need to be neglected.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of vulnerabilities out there right now. This is a fantastic discussion. I could go on for another half an hour with you guys easily, but before we sign off today, I kind of want to go. What are your final thoughts and recommendations to MSPs? That are going through this, may see this push towards remote work, and just overall, what are your best security thoughts moving forward? I know mine's probably longer, what I've just asked you, than what I'm expecting you to provide, but Gil, why don't you kick it off? What are your final thoughts?
I definitely, make sure that you are planning. At least have some idea of where you want to be with your customers when it comes to this new situation of people working from home partially. Get those things at least on paper. Understand where your vulnerabilities are, and I will let you know that I created some documents and documentation on our COVID-19 resource hub about this, and we're doing another webcast I think in a week or two about this same subject with the nerds about returning from home, things to consider. So use the things that we're all creating and making available to you to make sure that you're planning properly for how that's going to look and how you're going to be able to secure all these customers in these new hostile environments.
Very good. How do they reach out and get in touch with you as far as the blog and other stuff? Gil?
Sure. So you can go to solarwindsmsp.com/blog and see the blog. You can search Solarwinds MSP and then COVID-19, and you'll get the resource hub. Or you can follow me at cybersec_nerd on Twitter, and I push a lot of that stuff out as well.
Got to follow more nerds. That always helps. Fantastic. Billy, how about your final thoughts?
Yeah, I've been hearing quite a bit about planning, strategy, and testing out of the mouths of different industries and specific groups of MSPs. I'd like for those groups of individuals to give that a thought. And what I mean by that is, we can sit here and plan forever. We can try to test forever. And even the companies that are well established, that have all these controls to perform testing, or do they meet compliance requirements, they're never going to be perfect. And I think that these companies, I continue hearing about testing and policies and all this stuff, they're trying to create that perfect world, and it just doesn't exist. And hopefully the other guys will join in here, but it's all about, we have to find a starting place. And historically, over the past 18 months, we've been using this phrase, the security stack, which really evolves around what I call defense in depth. It's all about having layers of security, regardless, we were going out and doing our due diligence, selecting best of breed vendors. And those vendors, some of those vendors have changed with the way that we're now providing security services to the home. For an example, we're seeing a significant decline in those $8,000 UTM boxes where they needed, 1 terabyte throughput. Well, now they're downgrading to Ubiquity devices that provide some level of security UTM functionality, but they're taking that cost savings and now applying it to that home workforce, if you will. And so I think that, stick with your security stack, incorporate that in your plans. One of my most popular things that I like about some of the MSPs that are very defined or definitive on their models and their offerings, and I'm hearing here over the last couple of months that says, look, we're now mandating that they buy our cybersecurity package. If not, we're firing them. And it gives us a reason to fire them because we're opening ourselves up for risk, litigation, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, it's being able to take that cost savings from that static network, move that savings or at least a portion of that on how to address the cybersecurity monitoring / services to your new, connected world, if you will.
It sounds like confidence is a big thing, is pick your lane and be confident with it when you're going out here.
There's too much, there's a lot of planning, and there's going to be a lot of missed opportunity right now. You can plan and strategize forever, solidify the most basics, try to take the biggest crime, biggest bad out of risk and threats that you can. Roll it out, make adjustments as you go. I think Kyle hit on it earlier. It's like, you're never going to be able to test what you don't know. You know, they probably have devices and stuff on the network they don't even know about.
Yep.
So, which I know they do. So
Guaranteed.
So the whole experience with that.
Yeah, stick with the plan, roll with it, seek out for advice. There's plenty of partners and industries that help out, and just, you know, get moving.
Fantastic. Kyle, your parting thoughts?
I'm going to go a little bit more philosophical on this end. I think history doesn't, fare too well for the humble, the meek, those that aren't willing to take risk and aren't willing to shake things up. I think now more than ever is your perfect excuse to try, experiment, and fail. I can tell you in my own shoes that I also get to use the excuse of COVID-19 on why we're trying radically new things, even for, major investors with billion-dollar funds that works on. If it works on billion-dollar investors, there's an opportunity to shake up your offering. With that said, I think you should be bold. And I don't think boldness necessarily means the biggest, best, the brightest. I'm going to even argue against myself here. And the amount of times I hear, what new widget should I buy? And I constantly ask, are you using your existing widgets that are free? Like, I know that's against me. I'm a vendor that's saying, please try something new. But what's beautiful is when you start from the ground up, you build a good foundation, you can then make these bold new attempts that say, hey, you know what? Just like Billy just pointed out, I don't need that ridiculously expensive UTM. I'm going to shake things up and go with something different. Or I'm going to depend on my RMM more so I could do more with this and less with that. Or I'm going to reinvest in my people double when I should be. You could go the meek route and say, oh, you know what? We're going to obviously hoard all of our cash and we're going to be as cost efficient as possible. But to be honest, for the brave, now's the time to invest in better marketing, better sales, invest in your people. So when the economy does start to recover, you're the one putting the competitor out of business, not the one being put out of business or acquired. So that'll be how I'm going to end it.
I like that, Kyle. We have a lot of people actually saying that they're improving their revenue right now because they're doing the right things and they're being aggressive. So that's a really good point, Kyle.
Yeah. Very good. Well, fantastic. Great conversation today, gentlemen. Thank you so much. On behalf of the IOTA team, I wish to thank Gill Langston from Solarwinds MSP, Kyle Hanslovan from Huntress, and Billy Austin from Rocketcyber for participating in today's discussion. One final note, before we close the session, I want to make sure everybody's aware, July 7th, 8th, and 9th, the IOTA Beyond the Curve Cyberstream Series 2.0 will be happening 2 to 4:30 Eastern Time each afternoon. Very flexible, built for MSPs. That's our whole intention. We want to be short, succinct, and bring you some fantastic content that day, or those days. Register today at iota.com. Be safe, secure, and have an awesome day.